look at the formulas. Quick reminder for what is the formula for GDP. Well, first of all, it's consumption. We just said consumption's very strong, plus investment, plus government spending. So before I get to the rest, if we are in a recession and the government responds by having a massive Keynesian fiscal stimulus where they say, well, we're going to borrow $600 billion and build airports or roads or bridges or something to stimulate economic demand. Well, we don't have that happening. We don't need that happening because economic demand is strong. In fact, demand was too strong, which is how we got inflation. So sometimes the big increase in G makes your GDP look bigger and you would think the economy is great, but it's not. That big increase in spending is in response to a poor economy. The same thing can be said about the balance of trade, which is exports minus imports. Remember that exports add to GDP and imports subtract from GDP. So what happened in the second quarter? Well, it was negatively and heavily negatively influenced by a drag from inventories. We had companies trying to rebuild inventories, but they weren't rebuilding them as fast as expected. So that was a little bit of a drag on the GDP growth. In fact, it subtracted 2.2%. So if inventory builds had just been as big as they were in prior quarters, we wouldn't have a negative GDP. Well, they were bigger in prior quarters because we were coming off the COVID recession and we had supply chain issues. And so all of this has to be taken into consideration, right? Trade in the first quarter and late last year, quite frankly, we had this massive increase in imports because the price of energy was going up. And because US consumers had so much money from all the stimulus related to COVID, we were buying more and more stuff. So those increases in imports were subtracting from GDP. But if the consumer is strong and they're buying more things, that's not necessarily always a negative thing. So we have to look through that GDP report every time. One of the things I saw in this report, was that final sales to consumers, private domestic purchasers is what they call it in the report, up 3% in the second quarter. A recession is a lack of aggregate demand. A recession is when people are losing their jobs, when there's no jobs to be had, when people are losing their homes to foreclosure. So this is not a recession. There's the National Bureau of Economic Research, NBER. The NBER will declare a recession when we get a recession. To be sure, demand is decelerating. We run the risk of getting into a recession, and that risk is coming up pretty soon. Second half, probably Q4, more likely than not. We're off to a great start here in Q3 with only 1 month down, the month of July, obviously. So anyway, that's my little commentary on why it's 2 quarters negative, not necessarily a recession. Personal income would be going down in a recession, right? Personal income rose 0.6% in the month of June. That's the second straight nice hike, nice rise. Spending gained 1.1%. So that was pretty good. You can see these numbers are pretty elevated still here. Income, this is spending, the red, even well before COVID and all that. We're still above all of those levels. The economy is quite strong. So even adjusting for inflation, spending was up 0.1% in the month of June.